This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi. So we have the great fortune to learn Parshas Tzav. You know, Parshas Tzav is probably the most neglected Parsha in the Torah because it's usually Shabbos HaGadol. And most Rabbanim at Shabbos HaGadol are not giving a drush about Parshas Tzav. But by the way, just a personal tidbit, if you ever want to go into a rabbinate, highly unrecommended to give a Shabbos HaGadol drush about Parshas Tzav. Not that there's not enough to learn, just I don't think the Olam is going to go for that, right? But this year, we have an extra month. You know, it's interesting. If it wouldn't have been in Iber Yard, today would have been the first day of Pesach. Right. Last night would have been the Seder, you know?
We just missed it because the first day of spring was last night.
We just missed it. But it's cold, so, you know. Okay. Even though the earthworms came out this morning, that's also a good tidbit to know. I saw them. But so we're up to the Chodesh Aviv, so we're ready for Pesach, Shloshim Yom Kodem Echag, but we also have to learn Parshas Tzav. So Rashi says, in the beginning of the Parsha, Tzav es Aharon ve'esbanav le'mar, Zois Tairas ha'oila. By the way, what does the word Zois Tairas mean? What means Zois Tairas ha'oila? We already had all the laws of the oila in Parshas Vayikra. Where else do we have the expression Zois Tairas? We have it in Mitzorah, Zois Tairas ha-Mitzorah. So I saw something interesting this morning. The Haksava HaKabbalah brings down from the Vilna Gaon that the expression Zois Tairas means here are a few added laws that we never said before. Meaning it doesn't mean these are the laws of. It means here are a few haisafos. The main body was already discussed. Here are a few additions. I wasn't aware that's what it means, Zois Tairas. Okay, but Rashi says Tzav. Rashi says Ein Tzav ela lashon zeros miyad uladayros. Tzav is a lashon of energy, of encouragement. Amar Rav Simlai b'yoyser tzarich lahakasav lazar z'makom sheyesh chesaron kis. The Torah requires more reminder in a situation where there's a loss of money. You know, to tell people to do a mitzvah, they're willing to do a mitzvah, but as soon as it involves loss of money, you need a little bit extra care. By the way, the Ger Rebbe says, homiletically, you know, all the parts of the body have a guard. The eyes, you could close them. The ears, you could put your lobe in. Your mouth, you could shut it, even though people have a hard time with that, but it is possible, yeah? And even the nose, you could close it. There's one part of the body that has no kiss. Your mind. The mind, there's nothing guarding it. The mind races and wanders. So what it means is, you know, you need extra caution guarding your mind. You know, the mind is a terrible thing to waste. Many people don't have to worry about that, though. But okay. In any event, Rashi says, the words of Rashi seem to be tamua. Tamua says the Reb Tzvi Hersh Mikaminka. Okay. What does Rashi mean? That Tzav is a lashon of zeros, and we need extra caution, b'makom sheyesh chesaron kis. And furthermore, we could be medakdek. He says, Tzav es Aaron of leimar. What do you mean, Tzav? Command Aaron and his sons to say. To say what? They don't need to say anything. They're not saying anything.
Normally would have said daber,
what do you mean? If it says daber, leimar, say to them saying, then I understand leimar. But what do you mean Tzav leimar? You're commanding them. You're not. So who's saying something? So the Gemara Menachah says, anyone who learns the Parsha of the Oila, it's Ki'ilu he was Makrav and Oila. Everybody knows that. That's why we say the Parshios of Karbanos. It's Unashalma Parim Sefasenu. By reciting the Karbanos, it's as if we brought them. And the Gemara in Tainis says on Daf Chav Zayin, Avram Avinu said, Vayomar Hashem b'ama ida ki'ira shana. Avram Avinu said, Ribbono shel olam. I understand the importance of Karbanos when the Beis HaMikdash is standing. When the Beis HaMikdash is not standing, how is the world going to stand? Right? Because Hashem told Avram the world stands on Karbanos. Avram says, what about when the Beis HaMikdash is not standing? So Hashem said, don't worry, they have the Seder HaKarbanos. When they read it, it's considered as if they brought it, and I'll be moichel them. Okay? So we all know the importance of Karbanos. That not only if you're oisek in an oila, it's ki'ilu you brought an oila, but the world literally stands on the recitation of Karbanos. So the Shla says, an interesting thing, that when a person says a Karbanos, it's good to be menader tzedakah at that time. Why? Because as we said, there's nothing like chesar and kiss. You know? There's an expression, nothing shows appreciation like cash. Right, you ever hear that? Nothing. That's it. Nothing shows appreciation like cash. No, nobody needs shalchmanis, so they need Laffy Taffies. Nothing shows appreciation. So here also, you want to show Hashem you really mean it? While you're saying the Karbanos, anyone, you could sit there, people read, they open the siddur. There was a lady, she was davening, what are you davening? She said, Yal V'yava, Yal Nisim, Ritzei, V'yakampora, everything she said in Shemona Esrei, Anenu, Nachem. There are people who just read the siddur. Anybody could rattle off anything. Let's put as they say, put the money where your mouth is. If while you're being saying Karbanos, you pledge tzedakah, that's an important inyan, says the Shlach Kadosh. Then it will be kilo you're a makar of a carbon. Okay, but get ready for the whopper. Nimsa l'chayra hava amina. Kishehikriv ha-carbon bizman shebeis hamikdash kayam. I would have thought, between me and you, when the Beis Hamikdash stood and they actually brought the Karbanos, nobody would have thought in the middle million years, you need to read the Parsha. When there's no carbon, you read the Parsha in lieu of the carbon. But when there is a carbon, well, you bring the carbon. So you would have thought, when they're makriv Karbanos, when the Beis Hamikdash stood, they didn't need to read the Parsha, the Oila. They brought the Oila. Right? But the Torah is saying no. The truth is not like this. When they brought the carbon, they needed to read the Parsha maybe to be able to focus on what kind of carbon they're bringing. Just like we find that during the Havas Bikurim they had to read the Parsha. So by all the Karbanos. So he's bringing here a tremendous chiddush, a very interesting chiddush from the Sefer Shnei HaMa'oros, that in order that we know that by reading the Parsha of Karbanos, it's like bringing a carbon. It's even what the world stands on, and perhaps even you should pledge some money to tzedakah. But when the Beis Hamikdash stood, they were makriv the carbon. Who would have thought they read the carbon? Says the Shnei HaMa'oros, no. Well, we learn from here that when the Beis Hamikdash stood, they still read the Parsha of the Karbanos. Now, where do we learn this from? From Rashi. V'zeh perush ha-pasuk v'Rashi. This is how Rashi explains the pasuk. Tzav es aroin v'esban of lemar zois toiras ha'oila perush kishamevi oila lahakriv tzarach sheyomer ha-parsha. Tzav es aroin, command Aroin, that what? Zois toiras ha'oila, you need to say the Parsha. Amar Rab Shimon b'yoyse tzarach ha'makam lazaris v'makam shesh chesar nechis. You know what? When it's not costing you any money, right? Bizman hazeh, okay, you could tell a person, say the Parsha, he'll say the Parsha, because after all, he's not spending any money. But if a guy is spending money, then you're telling me, Nachdem Tzi, you gotta say the Parsha also, so you needed more encouragement at a time when you're actually being makriv the carbon to say the Parsha. That's the Pshat, Tzavazar Nesban of Lamar. Command them to do what? Lamar, to say the Parsha. That's an interesting chiddush.
But you didn't say that by the other Korbanos, right? Those Torah Slamor, only by Ola. So how do we learn that all the other Korbanos you have to do the same? The Ola you could
it's
say...
going, according to this, it's going on all of them. It's going on, no, that's if Chesar and Kiss is going on the Oila because you're losing the money.
Right. But
now we're saying, the Makam Shesh Chesar and Kiss is when you actually bring the carbon as opposed to Bezman Hazeh when it doesn't cost you anything. In other words, Bizman Shesh Chesar and Kiss, you need to admonish a person to say the Parsha when he's actually bringing the carbon and he's losing money. Therefore, that's the pshat of the word Lamar, that even when there's Chesar and Kiss, and he's being maybe the carbon, he has to read the Parsha. That's a very interesting chiddush. That's a very novel idea. And the question is this really in fact the case? So I have a beautiful sefer. I've quoted it many times on Bereshis, and on Bamidbar, and on Devarim, and now it came out on Vayikra. And that is the Megadim Chadashim of Rabbi Yoel Weiss. Reb David Yoel Weiss, who lives on Rechov Shmuel Hanavi. I had this chus to meet him when I went to Eretz Yisrael, not this past time, but before. And he quotes the Kli Yakar in the opening pasuk in this week's Parsha that disagrees with this. What does the Kli Yakar say? Pasuk says, Tzav es Aaron v'esbanav leimar, zois Torah ha'oila, hi ha'oila, al moikta al mizbeach kol halayla. And he says, also the same idea, that everybody knows that anyone who learns and says the Parsha of an oila is as if you brought an oila. And that's the meaning, zois Torah ha'oila, anyone who is oisek in the Torah of ha'oila, hi ha'oila. Right? Zois Torah ha'oila, hi ha'oila. Anyone who learns the Parsha of the oila, it's as if he was makriv an oila. But then the Kli Yakar has a drush. The pasuk continues. Al moikta al mizbeach kol halayla. The Laila represents what period in our history? The Galus. That you know when learning about the oila is like being makriv and oila. Kol halayla. That's only in the time of the Galus when you can't actually be makriv the carbon. But when you actually can be makriv the carbon, then you can't say then ki azman hamuchan lazeh she'oisek b'taras oila doima kilu hikrav oila is during the Galus. Because then Klal Yisrael need to come on to the principle and the methodology of Unashama Parm Svasenu. But Al Kol Halayla Ad HaBoiker Ad V'Loyad B'Chlal. Because once the morning comes, you don't need to come on to, once the morning comes, you don't need to come on to Unashama Parm Svasenu. Because then you're going to actually bring the Parim. So Rav Yoel David, Rav David Yoel Weiss maintains that the Kli Yakar argues on this chiddush of the Shnei HaMa'oros because he seems to be saying that in the Boiker you don't need to say the Parsha. I don't know if it's so compelling. Maybe according to the Kli Yakar is when does it suffice just to say the Parsha? That's Kol Halayla. But when the Boiker comes, you can't rely only on Zois Taras Oila, but it doesn't mean that you don't have to say the Parsha. Anyway, there's a Medrash Tan.
Sources that say that you have to say the
Parsha.
Parsha when you bring the.
Is there? Well, the source that we have so far is the Shnei HaMa'oros. But is there an earlier source? So he quotes the Medrash Tanchuma. The Medrash Tanchuma says, Siman Yadalid, Zois Torah Ha'oila, Zoy Kriyas HaTorah. The Medrash Tanchuma says, Re'u Kama Chaviva Kriyas HaTorah L'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shenemar Tzav Es Aharon V'Yesbanav Leimar. Sheyoimru levnei Yisrael v'yisazku b'kriyas ha'oila she'af al pi shemakrivim oila oiskin hayu b'kriyasa k'dei sheyizku b'karban oila v'kriyasa. The Medrash says. So it's a Beferish Medrash that says like the Shnei HaMa'oros that we see how beloved Kriyas HaTorah is that what? That they would read it even when they would be makriv the carbon.
So Yisrael would stand in the Azara while the Kohanim were bringing the carbon, and they would have some kind of signal that
they would have some kind of kriya
that
they should read the Parsha.
Should be saying the Parsha.
Yeah. Now the Samar Rebbe and the Divrei Yoel asks on the Medrash Tanchuma based on the Kli Yakar who seems to say you don't have to. You only have to read the Parsha Bizman HaGolos. But according to the way the Shnei HaMa'oros is reading the pasuk is saying Tzav Aaron V'Esbanav Leimar, that you need to command them to actually say the Parsha. So this is a very interesting machlokes whether the Parsha of Kriyas HaKarbanos applies when they actually were makriv the Karbanos. Okay.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.